Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill Obrien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill Obrien.
Well, thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. This, as I'm sure our regular listeners will know, this is our first live broadcast this week. And yesterday I was on the road, and Monday I was up to my eyeballs and stuff, and I couldn't seem to get to the program, and I apologize for that. But on the road 8 hours yesterday, and wonderful, beautiful day, and missed the program, but I enjoyed my trip just as well. It is a pleasure to be with you. Unfortunately, this is our first live program, as I mentioned this week, and that's a problem. That's an issue, and I apologize for that. Let me first of all thank you for your continued support of the program and of Bob and Agnes and the folks at Head On who make this program and others like it possible on that network. It's very, very important because, as most of you are aware, this network is totally listener sponsored, and you folks keep it on the air, and it's been on the air for a number of years, and I appreciate so much that you continue to give Bob and Agnes the support that they work so hard to earn. This is a little bit special for me today because this is our first program of our 7th year of broadcasting here at the Virtual Center. We began on the 11th of March in the year 2018. That's the first podcast, the first broadcast that you will see archived if you go to whiterosesociety.org. The very initial first program was March 11th. And, of course, Monday was the 11th, but as I mentioned, we're not able to do a program on Monday. So this is our first live broadcast of our 7th year of broadcasting here at the Virtual Center. And I really do appreciate your continued support. I never would have believed that we'd be on the air for 6 full years, and now heading into our 7th. It's unbelievable. It's in fact remarkable to me. I just can't express in words how this makes me feel. How honored I am to be able to do this for as long as we've been doing it. And I know Bob and Agnes have been on probably twice as long as I've been on with this program. So I know they appreciate your continued support as well. Would love to hear from you. We do have, and I'm hard put to find the phone number right now.
Dr. Bill, don't, because your guest is on that line right now.
Oh, all right. So we do have a guest. And our guest is Kevin Shanley. And Kevin, if you remember, was on with us several weeks ago. And I've been trying to get him back. He was scheduled one time a couple of weeks ago, and we ran into technical difficulties. And then Kevin's been kind of on the road himself over the last couple of weeks. So, Kevin, are you there?
I'm here, Bill, and it's great to talk to you again.
How are you doing?
Well, I was in Asia for, let's say, 15 days, giving a loss of day going each way. And in that period, I got to visit Taiwan for 4 days, Japan for 4 days, and the People's Republic of China for 5 days. It was sort of a type of business pleasure journey. And I got to lecture at Taiwan National University and also
great.
at the University at the University of Tokyo. So I guess we're going to be talking about Taiwan today.
Well, I'm interested in your trip. First of all, because what I feel like, we're getting this right off the hot off the presses, as it were. You just got back from there, and Kevin, you mentioned that this was work and pleasure. Did you go with a group, or did you go by yourself, or how did this work?
I went to Taiwan with another professor, and then while I was there, I met 3 former students who were doctoral students of mine and attended National University of Taiwan, through whom I got a chance to lecture the political science department on the question we're going to be looking at today, that is the Taiwan issue.
So you had a dry run. You tried out what you're going to deliver here on the National University of Taiwan. Well, that's just great. Well, Kevin, did you have any surprises in for example, 5 days in China? Did you notice anything that you kind of took note of? I know you've been there before.
Yeah. Well, what I've taken note of, or took note of, and have been taking notice of about China, is how you have increasing political repression on the part of the present Chinese regime under Xi Jinping. In fact, China has gone backwards, not forwards, in its human rights activity. Including in that now is over 200,000 cameras installed in China, a new facial recognition, and what they call social credit monitoring, which essentially monitors all the activities, banking, credit cards, and now on the part of the Chinese people.
Right.
So without blathering on, Bill, it's been very discouraging for friends of China in the United States, including myself, in our view towards China. And I might just say, sort of in passing, that it's also resulted in an ongoing hardening across political lines in Washington regarding China. So it's not a pleasant picture, and it definitely represents what I'll call a downward move in Sino-American relations. So I'll stop.
Well, Kevin, if you don't mind, the president continues to speak about the good relationship that he has with the president of China, and you're suggesting that it may be more talk than reality.
Well, I think sometimes what happens, Bill, in international relations is the confusion between interpersonal relations between two leaders and the fact dynamics, the ongoing dynamics of the relationship, whatever the two nations are concerned.
Right.
I mean, in all these cases, of course, both leaders, and it particularly was related to the recent meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un in Hanoi, of all places, that they want to put the best face on that all the time.
Right.
And nothing's going, and public perceptions are not going to be furthered by, putting a negative spin. But if anybody looks carefully at the relationships between China and the United States and the actions that China has taken, it can only conclude in the fact that China has been a big disappointment to the United States in terms of what we expected of her, both domestically and globally.
Now, and are you speaking mostly in the area of human rights, or are you talking about
Well, I'm speaking
trade
in 2 or 3. Yeah. Let me just enumerate what our biggest problems with China are. Human rights, of course, is right up there on the list. The militarization of islands in the South China Sea, created islands by the Chinese, and the militarization, that is runways and planes, in direct violation, I might add, of a decision handed down by a court at Geneva on the use of international waters. They were condemned. The Philippines brought a suit against China because some of those islands in the South China Sea are not only claimed by the Philippines, but also claimed by Vietnam. And so China unilaterally has just gone on with this building. And in reaction, the United States has conducted what is called freedom of navigation, naval freedom of navigation cruises past these islands. And what is that? That has been, in fact, that recently a Chinese destroyer damn near rammed an American destroyer.
Right. I do remember that.
So, then you have the questions of forced technological changes by companies doing business in China. You have the issue of cyber attacks by China on the United States. You have the issue that has really brought great disappointment to the treatment of Muslims, or Uyghurs as they're called, in Xinjiang province, re-education camps, putting these Muslims in re-education camps and occupying their houses in the meantime.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
That has really been a great disappointment.
Right.
To let's say, China watchers or sympathizers in the United States.
So, in other words, what we hear mostly is the so-called tariff war that's going on between between the United States and China. But you're pointing out, there's a lot more.
The tariff war bill is simply what I'll call, for lack of a better word, the tip of the iceberg.
Okay.
There are other issues, some of which I've just enumerated, that don't get a great coverage in the press. They're equally at odds between Beijing and Washington.
Well, Kevin,
all of them together, all of them in a composite way, has resulted in a downward trend in American attitudes towards China. Let me be more specific. A Pew recent research poll indicated now, they did a poll of what countries in Asia do you trust and distrust. The trust of China in the United States is now about 30%.
Oh, okay.
The trust of Japan, on the other hand, is 80%.
Right. Well, the situation with China seemed for quite a while to be improving when, because the first meetings between Xi and President Trump were somewhat positive, and of course President Trump puts a positive spin on these things anyway. But that's why I was a little bit surprised by the tariff issue coming up, because it looked like things were on the upswing. I had no idea that the situation was as negative as you painted, Kevin. And this is given the fact that China is China, this is very troubling. I think. Of course.
And of course, the tariff question is inextricably intertwined with the balance of trade between the two countries, which has been developing over decades and now is incredibly in favor of the Chinese.
Right.
Through the actions of prior administrations, going all the way back to Bush and Clinton. I won't go into all that.
Right.
And the tariff is an attempt on the part of Washington to sort of close that trade gap.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether it will be successful, of course, is no one knows at this point.
No, exactly. And there's so much going on surrounding the president right now that it bothers me, because this situation with China, if as it deteriorates, can't be ignored, obviously, and I suspect that it's not being ignored.
Well, and And there's another, what I'll call institutional dynamic that works here now. Historically, it's known as the Thucydides trap. Thucydides was the historian of ancient Greece and the Peloponnesian Sparta-Athens War. And he claimed that it was the rise of Athens and the fears that brought forth in Sparta, the rising power versus the status quo power, that brought on that particular war. And there's some who claim that that same dynamic is in operation today with China as the rising power, challenging the United States as the dominant power.
Right, right.
And that, though not inevitable, in fact, they did a study at Harvard of 20 cases through 3 centuries in which this dynamic operated. In 16 of those 20 cases, the result was war between the rising and status quo power.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
That's a sobering, and this was a study done at Harvard University, the Kennedy School of Government.
Right. Kevin, already you've given us a lot to chew on here. I wanted to, I'm trying to, before we get into Taiwan, because that is really the major theme, I wanted to ask you about the summit in Hanoi.
I got that from your email.
Well, because I'm reading things and I'm kind of getting the sense that we don't really know what how bad it was, or because the president continues to put a very positive face on his continuing relationship with Kim Jong-un, but I just kind of reading between the lines. I just think there's got to be more. The fact that theoretically the president walked away, and at the same time he's basically saying had no effect on a relationship at all. Well, that's a little bit tough to believe. So I'm wondering what your spin on it is.
Okay. First of all, I think most people don't really understand completely what the American position on North Korean nuclear program is. We want a comprehensive, irreversible, verifiable, and immediate denuclearization of North Korea. That's our position.
Right.
Then you have the 2 questions. One is, Kim Jong-un ever going to accept that position, given that nuclear weapons are, quote unquote, his security blanket, and he's seen what happened to Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein. And also, the story I'm getting is Kim Jong-un appeared at the conference table with Trump, demanding that all sanctions be immediately removed.
Mm-hmm.
That was never going to happen because the sanctions are our only leverage against Pyongyang to bring that about. So that's the story that I get, is that Kim Jong-un came in with demands that either he thought would never be accepted or he naively believed would be accepted by Trump in Washington, and the whole thing collapsed.
Yeah.
See, I mean, negotiations are you give and I give.
Right. And so when you come in and you draw a line in the sand at the very beginning, there's no negotiation possible.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That's what he did. Best I know. What's behind the headlines? Why Trump walked away? And Trump might want to have a nice resolution of this issue because he'd like to get the Nobel Prize. I understand that. And he has an insatiable desire for publicity. But there are still concrete issues that need to be talked about.
Right.
And national interest in operations on both sides.
Yes.
And I mean, smiles and champagne around a conference table and a lot of photographs and a positive isn't going to change those dynamics whatsoever.
Right.
It's almost like the immovable force meeting the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object.
Yes. And the result is nothing.
Nothing. That's right,
nothing.
Bill.
Yeah.
paralysis.
Oh,
but
God,
often
paralysis,
that's the way
exactly. Yeah.
Often
Wow.
in negotiations, whether you're negotiating to buy a car or whatever, each one starts out with their optimum demands, that which they would most like in the best of all possible worlds to get.
Right.
And then no one ever goes into a situation aware that they are going to get what they would most likely want.
Right.
And then that's when the negotiation process starts.
Right. I guess and Kevin, can you elaborate a little bit on because you just talked a few minutes ago about the situation in China, the deterioration of the situation with China.
Yes.
And now we're talking about the failure of the summit with North Korea. And
Right.
I'm wondering about the connection between China and North Korea. And I'm wondering, how influential is one on the other, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I can't imagine that they're totally separate from our perspective. They've got to be linked.
Well, let me. I won't say digress, but trying to look at your question and a couple of the relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang, China and North Korea.
Yeah.
In recent years, has been more and more a fractured one, a difficult one. Some people argue that the relationship is either on the verge of breaking down or has already broken down, in the sense that North Korea has been the irresponsible friend.
Right.
In other words, China cannot control all the missiles firing. But on the other hand, of course, and the People's Republic of China has been the major economic supporter of North Korea, particularly in terms of giving them things like food and oil.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what gives China leverage over North Korea. However, they got to be careful the way they use that leverage, that is China, because if they press China too hard economically, North Korea could collapse.
Yeah.
Now, how could that affect China? It could affect China in a lot of different ways. Number one, suddenly you could have South Korean and U.S. troops on the Yalu River.
Mm-hmm.
We've done that, done that say in 1950.
Yeah, we've done that.
And number two, more threatening to China, more dangerous, more haunting to China, is thousands of refugees now, with North Korea economically collapsed, fleeing over the border into China.
Right.
And that then creates all sorts of problems.
Right.
For China. That prospect, I'm sure, haunts the sleep of the Chinese leadership.
Right.
See, that's what really is a problem to them if they try and go too far with their leverage of economic support or taking it away. Well, it could end up with the consequences that I just mentioned for Beijing. That's they don't want. Additionally, of course, as I say to my Chinese friend, Pyongyang is a lot closer to Beijing than Pyongyang is to Washington.
Yes.
In terms of their missiles.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Well, it's so complicated. In fact, your travel itinerary, where you spent 4 days in Japan and 4 days in Taiwan, and when you think about the interactions between these,
and 5 days in China.
China, yeah, and you think about and a major player in this, of course, is South Korea, and I mean it is just extremely complicated.
Yes.
But so important to the future of the world, because let's face it, China is China.
Well, that's right.
I mean, it's a massive trading partner potentially, but it's also a massive military threat and various other things as well. So,
well, what has happened is in Washington, there's been a very subtle but important shift in focus before Trump, but even in the latter stages of the Obama administration, we were moving from the 40-year policy of strategic engagement, going back to Nixon, back to Carter, back to that period, 40 years, which we suddenly realized, Washington suddenly, the light bulb went on, it didn't work.
Yeah.
So now we've sort of evolved into now what is called strategic competition.
Mm-hmm.
Very subtle, and this did not start with Trump, by the way. We like to pick out Trump and say it was a gradual disillusioning in Washington,
right,
about our expectations for China. For example, as China became more economically prosperous, which she's become, she would then evolve, and in a larger middle class, she would evolve into a Western style or some type of American democracy or Western democracy. Give up one-party rule. My point, though, we now recognize she's going in the opposite direction.
Right, exactly.
In other words, China has disappointed a lot of people in that she has not lived up to American expectation, which you could argue were very naive anyway. China's never lived up in all her history to American expectations.
No,
it's China, as you rightly say.
Right. And we have never, it seemed to me in history, we've never really quite known what to do with China. Because it's potentially so huge and so influential and powerful in the world that I don't know. We've never known whether to befriend it or to treat it as an enemy or what. And I think that use of the phrase strategic engagement is an interesting term. It's an interesting term, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah.
It has all sorts of implications.
But Bill, number one, I completely agree with you. Let me start. But I think if you look historically, China, indeed Asia, it's a different civilization from ours.
Yes.
That were many people who. But now, what do I mean by that? Let me be more specific. They have a completely different culture. It's an Asian culture, not a Western Anglo-Saxon culture, a U.S. culture.
Right.
They have no tradition of democracy. They don't have, to quote Tom Friedman, the habits of democracy. Most of their history is imperial, like Russia, just as an aside. So we don't have much in common there.
Right.
And, of course, we don't even have to get into the culture of the language barriers and that most Americans don't speak Chinese. So, I mean, the roots, everything you say is true. But the roots go way back. Mm-hmm. I think it was Rudyard Kipling who once said famously, who had lived in Asia, East is east and west is west and never the twain shall meet.
Right. Right.
And he lived in Asia, in India more specifically, for years.
So our naivete when it comes to China has been that we assumed that as they became more wealthy and prosperous, they would just become us or something closer to us. Yes.
That's right. To put it in sort of a silly way, we believe that within every Chinaman there was an American trying to pop out.
Right. And all of it is driven by economics. We seem to think that everything revolves around that. And the fact that China has a culture which has never been totally supportive of economic development of capitalism or anything like that. And the fact that I'm thinking back in history when the Chinese emperor just shut China off from the West totally.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And because they were trying to preserve their own identity, unique identity, I think.
That's right. And may I just a little fact in it. And recently, that is 2013, the Chinese Communist Party, I'll be glad, issued a document number 9. This is an inter-party memorandum to the, from the central office, and sort of synthesize the document. I'll send it to you. Essentially said we have to reject Western poisoning Western values.
Right.
Because right now said that.
Right.
This was the advice of the Chinese leadership in Beijing to the whole country and to the Communist Party. We have to fight against, reject, and be worrisome about Western values.
Right.
And this is going into their universities. This was their advice. But we have to, it's almost like a return to isolationism again.
Exactly.
That you mentioned
right.
just.
Right.
And
right.
This is the China and the Communist Party's made that decision.
And we, as you say, Americans like to believe that, that within every Chinese person is an American trying to get out,
Right.
And we tend to believe that what we are is so natural and so in tune with what man is destined to be that every man, no matter what culture, is ultimately headed in the same direction we are. And that's
true.
That's not true. Yeah, my heavens,
well,
Kevin.
We believe that the values that we hold near and dear, Western values, liberal, democratic values, are, to quote the Declaration of Independence, self-evident truths.
Right.
Everybody wants them, and therefore all we have to do is give these people a little nudge, a little economic help, friends, a little nudge, and guess what? In the morning we'll wake up and the whole world is just like us.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's the way we have, in a messianic way, that's the way Americans see the world and have seen it historically.
And we've kind of behaved that way in terms of the concept of nation building, in terms of the concept of replacing unfriendly governments with friendlier governments, and all of this. All of it has been driven by these basic assumptions, it seems.
Sure.
Wow.
See, the questions that come up here regarding the transference of our culture and system outside the country is A, do other people want democracy? We answer that question unequivocally, yes. B, if they want it, can they make it work? Yes. C, do they have any tradition of democracy? And that's where the whole problem gets muddled.
Yeah.
To quote Tom Friedman, most countries have no habits of democracy.
Right. Right.
But we don't want to add, though, in our sort of blind faith about the efficacy, the legitimacy of our system, it's just an assumption that we can sort of transfer it around the world to every Hottentot and Beluga tribesman in Africa, and they'll all want to China with.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm almost laughing, Bill, at the naivety of that view.
Well, I mean, we've got to be we're going to be disappointed. There's no way we cannot be disappointed.
That's absolutely right, Bill. And I think you've used the proper word here. We've seen this time and time. Nation building.
Right.
Nation building.
Yeah.
Wasn't that what the Vietnam War was all about in terms of?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And we had I don't know, in the grant we had Jeremy Surrey from the University of Texas, and he's written a book on nation. He's written his book on nation building, and
that's right.
And he said it's in America's DNA.
Well, Jeremy is absolutely right.
That's exactly
I actually
on
have
target.
used that. I actually have used that phrase. I don't remember where I stole it from, Jeremy or not, but it's out there in the landscape. Sure, I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I guess part of the Taiwan situation is part of this in a way. I mean, it's a facet of this story. And I don't know how you I know you gave a couple of lectures in the Orient, so why don't you just take it and deal with it the way you want. I'll just try to chime in if I can see someplace that it might be worthwhile getting you to elaborate a little bit.
Okay. Well, I'll sort of go through this, hopefully in some sort of a orderly and comprehensive fashion. Number one, Taiwan has long been the most sensitive issue in Sino-American relations, and will most likely remain so for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Two, the impasse across the Taiwan Straits is one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world, and it's the one issue that could lead to a quick war between the United States and China today.
Mm-hmm.
China has made it perfectly clear that if Taiwan formally declares its independence, that would immediately trigger a military response on the part of China. China calls this matter unfinished business of the Chinese Civil War and is a relic of the Cold War and is a matter for China alone to resolve.
Okay.
Many in the U.S. and elsewhere may reasonably ask why America cares about this island 100 miles off the coast of China. Why does the United States remain committed to Taiwan when this commitment could lead to war, possibly nuclear, between the U.S. and China? Then there is the related question, why does China care so deeply about this island that it is willing to risk money, many other political and economic issues to focus on taking control of China? In other words, why are the Chinese so committed to these questions? So what I'd like to do here is just look at, first of all, why does China care about Taiwan?
Right.
Taiwan is a symbol of China's century of humiliation. It was the loss to Japan in 1895. It is also a symbol of China's historic victimhood. The return of Taiwan is also wrapped up in China's traditional measure of national power, self-respect, dating back to its imperial days. It's related most directly to the whole question of Chinese unity.
Right.
To the Chinese, the idea that Taiwan is a part of China is self-evident and an unquestioned article of faith. And it's essential to understand that the Chinese today deeply believe that Taiwan is historically a part of China.
Right. I was going to ask you. I was just going to ask you, what about the Taiwanese people? Do they consider themselves Chinese?
Okay. In the intervening years, and right now, Taiwan has developed a distinctly different identity, particularly among the younger generation.
Uh-huh.
They do not consider themselves Chinese. They, in fact, consider themselves Taiwanese. In fact, if there's one issue that unites both political parties in Taiwan, is that under no circumstances do they want to be reunited with the mainland. So the gist of your question is absolutely correct. I know Taiwanese students. As I just said, I just came back from Taiwan. But even before that, I've interacted with both Chinese students and Taiwanese students. And it's an article. I've never met a Chinese student who will say anything else but Taiwan is a part of our country and we want it back.
Right.
Taiwanese students say generally, well, no, we don't want to. In fact, China, Beijing, has actually offered out a formula called One Country, Two Systems, which they did apply to Hong Kong after they took it over in 1997. Even with that as a sort of a lure there for Taiwan, They said absolutely. Both political parties said no. We do not want. And as regards that formula as applied to Hong Kong, one party, one country, two systems, it hasn't worked out that way in Hong Kong.
No, I know that.
And so my only point, Bill, is so when Taiwan hears that offer from Beijing, they immediately think, well, didn't Taiwan try that? And how well did it work out for them?
Right.
I'm saying did Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
you may remember the Umbrella Revolution of a few years back in Hong Kong.
When Mao took over in China in '49.
Sure. Yes.
And Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan. The nationalist government moved to Taiwan.
That's true.
At that in that time, was that in other words, did Chiang Kai-shek believe that he was moving from one part of China to another part of China, or did he believe that he was moving into a totally different political situation? I'm wondering how much has changed between 1949 and now in terms of what the Chinese think about Taiwan and what Taiwanese think about being part of China. You know, I mean, I'm wondering, is this something that has developed since '49, or did it exist in '49? I'm kind of curious.
Okay, well, Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang, the national government, they always considered Taiwan part of China, but it was a China that they controlled. The government in Taipei under Chiang Kai-shek claimed that they were the only legitimate representation of the Chinese people.
Of China, okay.
That's right. On the other hand, Mao and company, they asserted just the opposite. The People's Republic of China is the only legitimate representation of China.
Right.
And that's the rub.
Right. So in effect, so Chiang Kai-shek then didn't believe that in moving to in fleeing to Taiwan, he was leaving China. He felt that he was still in China.
Yeah, well, his leaving China in 1949 and fleeing to Taiwan did not, in his view, did not weaken his claim to represent all the Chinese people.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
So I guess you could take from that, Bill. You could extrapolate that he considered Taiwan a part of China.
Part of China, yeah. And I guess that's what I'm saying. So in a sense, what the Chinese are insisting upon now is the fact that situation has never changed. It continues to be what it was then.
Well, what's interesting in the evolution on Taiwan, the Kuomintang, the Chinese Nationalist Party, here's a strange irony, have been more in favor of unification with the mainland than the People's Democratic Party, the other party.
That is ironic,
which sort of is an elaboration of the point you just made.
Mm-hmm. I think it's fascinating. Do you think that, and this is just an opinion, but
sure.
Do you think that Taiwan's relationships with the United States have contributed to this sense of Taiwan being a unique place, in other words, not part of China any longer? I'm wondering if the relationship with us, with the United States, has obviously it's had an effect on the relationships between Taiwan and mainland China. But I'm wondering.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead. I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, that's fine. After 1949 and the defeat of Chiang Kai-shek, which, as you know, was a traumatic shock in the United States, and the debate was who lost China.
Yeah.
We saw all the affection that we had for the Chinese people say Chiang Kai-shek, all the affection we had for them was transferred to Chiang Kai-shek. All our aspirations, all our hopes for China, and the corollary belief that China, represented by the Chinese Communist Party, betrayed us.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, down through the years, and one of the reasons we support Taiwan is A, we're friends of each other, had a long-standing friendship with them. Two, they were our ally through a good portion, if indeed almost all the Cold War. And probably most important, they are a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, we all know the People's Republic of China is not.
Right.
And, of course, just historically, you had in the 50s, you may remember, this what they call the China lobby. Strong members of Congress, including at the time two future presidents, Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Johnson, strongly supported Taiwan.
Right. Right.
Henry Luce of the Luce Time Life,
Yeah,
that was a extremely influential supporter of Taiwan.
right.
So I guess, what I'm saying here is that there's a certain sentimentality in our view of, but also let's not overlook the geographical and strategic importance of that island.
Right. It's only 100 miles from the coast of China.
Well, the Japanese called it an unsinkable aircraft carrier. We later took up that phrase. That was part of our containment, island containment, Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines against the expansion of communism in Asia.
Right. Right.
See? So, in other words, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, the whole thing is fascinating, Kevin. It's,
oh, sure.
It's wow. So, but I'm fascinated by this one country, two systems idea. I mean, the implication here is that as long as Taiwan allows itself to be considered part of China, then Taiwan can govern itself however it wants. Is that what the two systems mean?
Hold on, Bill. The call dropped. I'm bringing it back.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Kevin? I think we lost Kevin there briefly. I'm really wondering about that. The term is fascinating. The one nation, two systems is kind of like China giving its blessing on Taiwan's relative independence, provided that it doesn't declare its independence. That's what it seems to me. As long as they appreciate the fact that they remain a part of China, then Beijing is saying we won't interfere. We could care less what they do. But the only place that they've tried this out before is Hong Kong, and it didn't work too well. The one government, two systems. One of the two systems disappeared, and I think that's what the Taiwanese people are looking for. But I don't think we have Kevin. Kevin, you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, great. Okay. I was kind of mouthing off myself while we were trying to reestablish the connection with you about the one government, two system idea. I mean, that's fascinating. It's because it's almost like, as long as you don't insist that you are politically independent and not a part of China, then how you operate, how you set up your day-to-day operation is your business. We won't interfere. That seems to be China's intent, to try to sell that idea.
Oh, that's right.
But
in point of fact, their intent was completely then uncovered in the way they treated and interfered in Hong Kong's political system.
Right.
Bill, in other words, they went back. They made that whole idea of one government, one one government, two systems, it left a bad taste in the mouth of both people in Hong Kong, and as a lesson to Taiwan, why we will never agree to that.
Right. But at the same time, China is not going to stand for Taiwan becoming any more separated than it is now.
No.
No. Okay.
No, and therefore, Bill, that's the impasse we're at, or they're at. Now, the American view, we may be interested in this, what our view is. Number one, with the Shanghai Communication of 1972 with Nixon, which we conceded that there's only one China, and we essentially said, well, you Chinese should work out this problem peacefully with each other.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a position really on that question. However, what's interesting is that at the same time that we were admitting to Beijing as your one country, we continued our military hardware support to Taiwan.
Right.
So it's the idea here that China and Taiwan should work out the problem on their own.
Right.
Our fear is that, and we've tried to strictly control Taiwan, that Taiwan, if it declared its independence and China responded militarily, we could be dragged into a war with China over Taiwan, over a question we really don't care about.
Right. Our interests, well, as you pointed out, though, I was going to say our interests are principally economic, but they're also quite strategic, and
well, they are both. They are both, and well, as one regarding our support for Taiwan, I thought it was very interestingly summed up. We're not going to love Taiwan to our death.
Mm-hmm.
See, and but on the other hand, I think we were cut off when I did point out that Beijing is now asserted as a core vital interest that both the East and South China Sea are part of Chinese territory. It belongs to them.
I see. So it's no longer international waters from their perspective.
That's right. Wrap your mind around that, Bill.
Well, and I'm thinking that part of the rationale for that is because Taiwan is 100 miles from the coast of China. So therefore, if they consider Taiwan part of China, then they consider everything between China and Taiwan part of China.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So suddenly the international waters are not international anymore.
You're absolutely correct.
And that's the premise on which they've been building military defenses on these islands.
That's right.
Wow.
And I'm going to say this hopefully very succinctly. China, Beijing would like nothing better than to see the backs of American sailors as they left East Asia.
Right.
I'm convinced that is their goal, eventually, to completely expel us. Read American Navy from the Western Pacific or from the East and South China Sea. Then the question comes from our perspective: will we ever acquiesce in such a policy or demand on their part?
Right. I don't think historically I don't think we can.
I agree.
I don't think. I mean, as I think back historically, we can't withdraw from any place.
No,
I mean, that's been our whole foreign policy shtick from the beginning, is that ultimately we've had to consider every part of the world linked to us. We can't afford to. Go ahead.
And may I also throw in this sort of, not muddy the waters, but how do you think Japan is ever going to settle where China has complete control of the East and South China Sea?
Right.
How about South Korea?
Yeah.
How about the Philippines, and how about Australia? One reason we continue to support Taiwan, it's the issue of American credibility and reliability. If we ever, this is what we believe, if we renege on our support to Taiwan, how is that going to play in Seoul, in Tokyo, Seoul, in
right.
Manila,
right,
or Canberra?
Yeah.
It's a credibility issue, but a dependability issue. We might as well take all the alliance, all the treaties that we have with South Korea, Taiwan, though we don't have an official, Japan, and the Philippines, Australia, and just whip them up.
Right.
Then they will start bandwagoning with China.
Wow. Kevin, I'm going to ask a question, and I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you think that President Trump knows any of this? I mean, I don't mean all of it. I mean any of it. I just get the feeling when he sits down at one of these summits, he's basically the same way that you and I would go and meet for a beer. You know what I mean? I just have a feeling it's not any deeper than that from his perspective.
Well, number one, I don't think he knows. I don't think, frankly, not to sound egotistical, he doesn't know as much as I know.
Yeah.
Or maybe you know.
That's what I'm guessing.
But here's the point. My only wish is that if you don't know something, at least listen to those around you who do know.
Who do know. And he won't do that.
And that's my main reservation with Trump. I don't think he's willing to listen to anyone.
No. He's actually believes, I think, that his personality on a one-on-one is so powerful, and his ability to influence other people is so pronounced that all he's got to do is establish a rapport with the other side, and everything will fall into place. I think he really believes that.
Bill, you're absolutely and completely right. But that's the same thing that Franklin Delano Roosevelt believed about Joseph Stalin. If he can only get his feet under the same table with Joseph Stalin, everything would work out well.
Right.
I don't know
getting Stalin to go along with the United Nations at the end of the war.
Yeah.
And in order to get that opportunity, Roosevelt was willing to look the other way in a number of situations that he shouldn't have.
Wait, what? True.
You know,
no question.
I mean, Stalin was, Stalin had an unlimited length leash. He could do anything he wanted to do and get away with it, and he knew it.
Oh, that's right.
And that's why I worry about these summits, because in order to get the one-on-one personal relationship that he's after, he's more than willing to sacrifice all of these other things, sanctions and everything else.
Your reservations about summitry are really not new. It's always been a concern in the State Department, among the rank and file of State Department people. Going back to George Kennan, who had a great distrust of summitry. Great distrust. In other words, what they say, what about the preparation that must take place before you put your feet under the same table with Stalin or Kim Jong-un?
Right.
Are you just going to go in there and wait? Is it going to turn into, I'll meet you at a bar, we have as you to take off we'll have a few drinks?
Yeah, and we'll just wing it from there,
That's right.
I really think that's where he comes from. And he doesn't want to know too much, because if he gets too much information in his head, it blurs the ultimate goal for him, which is to win control.
But to sort of look at, again, the question historically, and I'm risking stepping on my own lines, that was the idea with Roosevelt. This idea that I can charm, I can get, in other words, he completely cut the State Department right out of.
Right, exactly.
As did Nixon in 1972. He completely cut the State Department out of any of that interaction with Mao Zedong and
that one-on-one diplomacy, personal diplomacy.
Sure.
Because many people say, and I think they're probably right, that Nixon was the only one that could have pulled off the China deal in the early 70s. It was. Nobody was going to accuse him of being soft on communism or anything like that, because his whole life was, So, but that's. And this is just an aside, because we're only speculating about Trump, but. I think everybody's speculating about Trump right now, but but you're right. I really worry about summits, because I know enough, and it's not much, but I know enough that the whole idea behind a summit is to ratify agreements that have already been made. In other words, no surprises at a summit. If the summit is to be what the summit should be. And, of course, with Trump, it's just the opposite. It's all about the summit, and there's no preparation going into it.
I agree. And, Bill, you, in a sense, have just answered your own question earlier. Why did the summit in Hanoi fail?
Yeah.
Because you could argue because there wasn't enough preparation.
Right.
And there was maybe there was. I don't know. I wasn't sitting in the
I know.
Council of government, but didn't they know, or did they refuse to believe that Kim Jong-un would come in with a non-negotiable demand you stop those sanctions?
Yeah.
And another thing that's, I think, relevant here on that issue is all the time that the period of the preparations up to both his first Singapore and then Hanoi summit, there were evidence, and more recent evidence, that he was continuing on with his building or repairing. And now he's going back to that again, all satellite imagery. There's a great site, it's called 38 North, just in passing, that monitors all that stuff. Yeah. What's going on in North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
See? So, but I think for anyone to believe that he is going to give up his security blanket without a very high price exacted from the United States is just, they're living in a fantasy land.
The fact that he has nuclear capability is what got him the meeting with Trump in the first place.
You're absolutely true.
He's not going to give. He's not going to give it up. It's his ace in the hole. North Korea becomes nothing without nukes, without nuclear capability. And he obviously knows that. Plus the fact that from everything I read about North Korea, the North Korean people have been suffering beyond belief for a long time. And now they're beginning to get a little bit of reward from that suffering. At least their leader is being respected in the world as a leader. And it's only because of the nuclear capability. If you take that away, it all falls apart.
That's right.
So actually, our idea of complete denuclearization is perhaps a little bit naive. I mean, because it can't happen.
Stated, understated quite well.
Yeah, it can't happen. I mean, from his perspective, it can't happen. He can't let it happen because without it, he's got nothing.
No.
So, well, anyway, I didn't mean to divert you from Taiwan because I know you got quite a bit of stuff there. I just find all of this stuff so fascinating because rarely do you get an opportunity to ask somebody who really knows the area like you do. And as you say, as far as Trump, I don't think he knows as much as I know. I know he doesn't know as much as you know, Kevin. And
incidentally, and the Taiwan issue again, in 1992, I believe it was, leaders from Taipei and leaders from Beijing got together, and they created the document called the Consensus of 1992, and they agreed that both China, Taiwan, and there was only one China.
Right.
They finally agreed on that. But then they put in this ambiguous statement, but each side will determine for itself what that one China is.
Oh, my God.
But so what we have here is certainly the Taiwanese would love to see the status quo continue.
Right.
They've made that quite clear that they want the status quo. That is, we'll decide whether we do or do not want to return to the mainland. On the other hand, and just a couple days ago, the Chinese leadership, their foreign minister, said that the return of Taiwan to China is inevitable. But they never said how that's going to come about.
No.
See. So,
and it seems to me that we're potentially a major player in this because we tend to pull Taiwan further away from China. It seems like we do. I don't know that that's true, but
I find it very interesting that the very first phone call that Trump made as president was to the president of Taiwan.
Right.
That was the very first phone call.
Yeah.
In other words, what has happened here, the deterioration or the downswing in our relationship to Beijing has, almost like a reaction to it, has increased our closeness to Taiwan.
Right.
And China set out a policy or followed a policy to pressure every country in the world to break its diplomatic ties with Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, only 15 countries in the world, I think it's 15, Bill, have any diplomatic relations with Taipei or Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't know that. I didn't really appreciate that. Yeah.
No. China's economic clout, not surprising as the second largest economy in the world, particularly in Asia, is very, very strong.
Right.
In fact, what the allies, we'll call them the allies of the United States in Asia, what they fear most is they're going to have to choose between their economic interest that ties them to Beijing and their geostrategic interest that ties them to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to have to make the choice. It's like trying to choose between two friends of yours.
Right. So, it dawned on me from what you said, and this is just an observation.
Sure.
That what China is trying to do by putting pressure on other nations that it has commercial relations with to sever connections with Taiwan. That's really the same thing. That's the same thing President Lincoln tried to do with the Confederacy.
You're right.
is use our diplomatic leverage around the world to make sure that nobody recognized the Confederacy as legitimate.
Incidentally, Bill, and I think I said this about, I find the parallels with the Confederacy quite interesting, because I think in an email to you, I said by 1860 the South had their own identity as a separate people from the North.
Mm-hmm. I think, well, the leaders in the South...
An identity based in the fact that slavery was our peculiar institution, meaning it's our institution.
Right, exactly. And so everything that developed around that, the so-called upper class, the aristocracy, the life of leisure, all of that became part of this effort of the South, of the Confederacy, to build an identity unique from the rest of the country.
Oh, that's absolutely right.
And Lincoln diplomatically, when war broke out, made it a number one agenda to make sure that the Confederacy wasn't recognized by other nations, because just to do that makes it legitimate. And Lincoln never accepted the legitimacy of the Confederacy.
That's right.
So,
absolutely.
But it's a very, very similar situation to this.
Oh, yeah. The connection here is the identity of a people in a nation, or their identity in general.
Mm-hmm.
The Taiwanese have now, younger generation particularly, a distinct different identity.
Right.
Than maybe their grandfathers had.
Mm-hmm. We have a listener, regular listener, been a listener since we've been on, Kevin.
Sure.
Who lives in Taiwan.
Okay.
And he relocated there 15 years ago to teach English.
Yeah.
In the schools there, and he's still there, and he calls in here periodically, not that often, because I think it's a 12-hour time difference. So
you're right.
If we were on at one in the afternoon, it's 1 in the morning there.
Right.
And if he has to go to work the next morning, he can't obviously even be up. So he listens to the programs on podcasts. But he was telling me that when he called the last time, I made reference to your last program here. He said he had listened to it 3 times.
Okay.
And he's fascinated by it. And I guess, and what I'm wondering, and you just spent 4 days in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
Is this issue as prominent there as it is here? In other words, do the Taiwanese people talk about this all the time, or does it never come up, or what?
Well, let me just, in the recent elections in Taiwan between the Kuomintang and the People's Democratic Party for local mayors and stuff like that. The 2 major issues was, one, the Taiwan economy. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And are you ready for this? Same-sex marriage.
No kidding.
Those are the 2 big. What I'm saying, Bill, is there is already a consensus among the political. They don't debate this. There's a consensus among both political parties, as best I know it. We agree on one thing: no unification with China.
So, in other words,
disagree about anything else. About anything else: taxes, Chinese economy, LGBT.
Mm-hmm.
Fine, we can argue that. Is a consensus? No.
Okay. So basically, then, what you're saying is that the Taiwanese people are so firm in this that they don't even talk about it anymore because there's no need to. God Almighty, that's fascinating. Well, how is China?
I've got to get Dr. Shanley back on. Hold on one second.
Okay.
The Bluetooth.
Okay. Where I'm going is the fact that there is this consensus among the Taiwanese people. What I want to ask Kevin is, how does China contend or deal with this? because obviously mainland China is not going to accept this, because the Taiwanese people have made up their mind. There's a consensus there on what they want, and so therefore the issue's over. From China's point of view, it's not over.
So
I'm wondering, Kevin, are you there, buddy?
I'm here.
Okay,
I'm here,
I just want. I was just speculating about the consensus in Taiwan, to the point that they don't necessarily talk about it anymore because they don't have to. It's it's a done deal. It's a given. How does China deal with this? I mean, China's got to know that the Taiwanese people feel this way. I mean, they may not even care what the Chinese people believe.
It's an article of faith, a self-evident truth in Beijing, that their belief is completely wrong.
Yeah.
In other words, that Taiwan historically, which is not quite true, has always been a part of China, which is not true. But you can never convince anyone from China that I've ever interacted with that Taiwan has not always been a part of China.
Right.
It's a fact that hasn't been. I could quote them chapter and verse historically, but that's neither here nor there. Right. So essentially, they don't accept the Taiwan consensus.
Was and I don't have any idea about this, but I keep thinking back, because for me this is the start of when China's role in today's world became pronounced, is when Chiang Kai-shek moved there took the nationalist government there in 49. And I never really thought about before, why did he move it there? And obviously it seems like he moved it there because to him that was part of China.
What is interesting?
Go ahead. That's really all I got. It just never dawned on me before. I never asked myself, why did he move the government there? Why didn't he go to Honolulu or something? I mean, to Hawaii or somewhere. Obviously, he went there because he considered it part of China.
And incidentally, there are indigenous Taiwanese. There are people who lived in Taiwan before any other nation got involved. It's sort of like our Native Americans. In fact, when Chiang Kai-shek moved to Taiwan, he brutally suppressed all the objections of the indigenous Taiwanese people that had already lived there.
Right.
In fact, out of feelings of guilt, I'm talking about Taiwan, and I was just thought they have now reconstructed some of those villages of the indigenous Taiwanese. I visited one just when I was there. This is something about Taiwan that most people don't know about.
No,
in other words, when Chiang Kai-shek, well, first of all, it was under the control from 1895, Taiwan was of the Japanese, who incidentally built Taiwan National University. It was founded by the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not as well known that even before the Japanese, the Portuguese, the Dutch, I think the name Taiwan was actually used first by the Portuguese. And there were people living there already.
Mm-hmm.
Much like there were Native Americans, or First Americans, I prefer that term, but that's before Europeans arrived here.
Well, it's interesting that none of these nations that controlled Taiwan apparently were ever able to establish a cultural identity there. But obviously China believes that they do have a cultural identity there. Japan was in control of Taiwan.
Yes.
But nobody has ever suggested, even remotely, that Taiwan is significantly Japanese, because it was an alien occupier to the Taiwan people, obviously, when Japan.
Yeah,
And
but compared to, yeah.
Go ahead.
But
No,
compared to the way Japan treated other people in Asia, their treatment of Taiwan was very good.
Uh-huh.
In fact, there are many older Taiwanese who have very fond memories of Japan.
Of Japan, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
This is history I didn't know. Yeah. Wow. It's amazing.
Well, it's amazing the number of universities, including universities in China, that were established either by American missionaries, many of them in both countries, or were established by the Japanese in their good years, in the early part of the 20th century.
Right.
Before they got off the track into militarism.
Right. But, they became very militaristic in the middle of the century, yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
That's right.
You know, so. Well, Kevin, what do you think?
Japan had this idea, which was particularly started to be pronounced in the 1930s, that they were should be the civilizing force in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
That Japanese culture was superior to all the other cultures in the world, and that Japan should be at the head of the parade. That was the whole view of China. China was inferior. China needs our help to really modernize, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Interesting enough, a view that partially they got from the United States.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, there's an irony for you, Bill. Yeah.
All right. Well, go ahead. You were going to make you had a thought.
Well, I had this thought. It's amazing that this idea of exceptionalism, that you are a special nation, which the United States is not strictly limited to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Germany had it with Deutschlander über alles, Germany overall. Japan had it in the 30s. We are the benefactors. We are the guides, shall we say?
Yeah.
Go way back in history. In Asia, China believed for years and years that they were the cultural superiors to anyone in Asia, and in fact they were.
Mm-hmm.
Much of Japanese culture, South Korean culture, Vietnamese culture, just to name a couple, are 90%, Japan a little less, say Vietnamese, 90% Chinese. Korean, 90% Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, China was the cultural hegemon of Asia for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Japan a little less so, because for two reasons. Japan was separated by a good piece of water from China. And Japan had and they still have this very unique ability to borrow other countries' culture, but make that culture Japanese.
Right.
They are great borrowers and great imitators.
I think of the symbol or the idea of the rising sun.
Yes.
And and the implications that sends, that this is something new, and it's just going to grow and become bigger and bigger, and it's going to overwhelm the entire Asian portion of the world. Yeah. And that was very, very meaningful to me. It always was, that idea of the rising sun. I'm wondering about the Communist Party in China, Kevin, and as it relates to Chinese culture, to Chinese traditions. How much, there was always an idea. I used to have it all the time, that the imposition of communism on China was so alien to the culture that it would never take hold. But I'm beginning to get a sense that the Communist Party has seemingly found a way to become Chinese, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? It's not as driven by ideology as we we like to believe that there's a cultural part of this that is allowing communism and the Communist Party idea and the cultural traditions of China to mesh. And I'm wondering if that's happening. And I'm wondering.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah.
I don't want to elaborate because I'll just confuse it more.
No. Well, let me sort of pull apart, if I may, your thought in
Okay.
terms of the Chinese communist ideology, or I'll use the word here, authoritarianism.
Right.
It was very similar to the Confucian ethic. The Confucian ethic, social ethic, was the primacy of the family, number one, and number two, within the home, the absolute primacy of the father, the male over the female, and then a descending order of hierarchy through the sons, not the daughter, through the sons. My point is that under Confucian thought, and I've stressed this to some people recently, under Confucian thought, society took precedence over the individual, which is completely opposite of Western thought.
Right.
Where the individual is more important than the government or society. So that is a stark historical difference between Eastern and Western civilization. Now, so in that sense, which is an authoritarianism, you're absolutely right when you say that sort of there was a similarity between the thought of the Communist Party and Confucianism. Now, if you'll bear with me, in recent years, with the falling off, the questioning of the legitimacy in China of the Communist Party for the Cultural Revolution, many reasons, they have suddenly rediscovered Confucius again. And they know that the Chinese people essentially do not believe in communism anymore. They've rejected, as did Xi Jinping rejected. They've adopted capitalism with Chinese characteristics. So suddenly, many of the historical traditions of China, including Confucianism, which the Communist Party did everything to try to eradicate, they are now embracing.
Right.
There's now, I never thought I'd live to see, knowing this, that there would be now government-sponsored tours to the birthplace of Confucius. Yes.
Yeah.
When you think back that under Mao, when they called those ancient traditions as completely feudal,
right,
bourgeoisie. Suddenly they turned around, they spun on a dime, and suddenly now they're making heroes. Xi Jinping actually visited a Confucian temple with his picture taken, I might add. And he's talked about how China now has to be more aware of their great historical traditions. Well, if you look at the great historical traditions of China, Buddhism and Confucianism, one of them, and emperors, another one. They're in many ways, they are the red emperors.
Right.
Which is the same thing they said about the Bolsheviks in Russia, who became the communist czars. That's my point.
Right.
So I don't know whether I've commented insightfully, but I'll sum up that Marabalu Dictu, the present leadership has suddenly discovered and is using Confucius.
Right. Well, it seems to me that the party has bought into the idea that ideology, the communist ideology, has been rejected thereby become accepted that way. And
well, the one thing that both the communist ideology and Confucian thought had in common with each other, and again, I may be boring you with repetition, was the supremacy of society over the individual.
Right. No,
they always shared in common.
That is critically important because you're right. That's a major difference between the East and the West.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
I guess when communists threw off their ideology or recognize it as doesn't have the hold on the Chinese people, well, somewhere, sometime, it suddenly wait a minute, Confucianism. Yes, it stressed that same thing, and we all know how long a tradition in China the Confucian ideology was.
Yeah.
In the history of China.
Yeah.
Another thing you may interest you, Bill, in terms of economics, and you just touched economically, communism has never fit China very well in terms of state control. Somebody said that democracy and economics fit China or communism like a saddle fits a cow.
Mm-hmm.
Let me be very careful. The Chinese were always known as the Jews of Asia. Now, what do I mean by that? They were good businessmen. They were entrepreneurial. They were hardworking, and there are overseas Chinese, like in Singapore. One of the reasons Singapore developed into the great financial and economic place she is, one of the four economic Asian tigers, most of her people are Chinese.
Right.
In fact, this is the older generation of Chinese in Singapore do not like more recent immigrants from mainland China who come from the rural areas who are A, poor, and B, not as well educated as they are, and are drained on the social welfare system of Singapore. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it is. Well, I've always been fascinated with Confucianism, and I've always found so much of it admirable, in a way.
Sure it is admirable.
It's I mean, for its time, it was pretty powerful. I mean, if you think about it, because it was so comprehensive. It engulfed everything. The family, the society, the political structure, everything, property, everything. And I just found it to be almost a perfect. It seemed like a perfect fit for but
in the early 20th century, Chinese intellectuals, young people for the most part, who said, well, why are we in such a bad position? Why is Japan surpassing us? Why are we in such an inferior position to other nations? Why can we be made the prey of other nations? It's Confucianism that's holding us back. It's Confucianism. Their new ideology was science and democracy. Science and democracy. And where there was a complete rejection. And that rejection continued on into the Communist Party of Confucianism.
Right.
The phrase they used was feudal. It's feudal thought. It's archaic thought. It's anachronistic thought. And China would be better off if she got rid of it.
Yeah.
Really. There was a whole period that China turned its complete back on Confucius, including the period of the CCP.
Is this the same? Is this the same mentality? The entrepreneurism, the idea of democracy and science and progress and all the rest of it. Is this the same culture that dominates Taiwan? I guess what I'm saying is Taiwan kind of connected to this particular tradition in Chinese history, which is the young, best, well-educated, ambitious, and that it always seemed to me that was Taiwan.
Well, that's right.
Everything to me. Yeah. What is Taiwan like? I have this image in my mind. To me, it's just like one big city.
Well, first of all, Taiwan is 300 miles long. It's not a small island as we think of it.
Right.
And it has mountain ranges right down. It has beaches. Its climate is, of course, very, very tropical. Mm-hmm. Like other areas of Asia, it's subject to hurricanes. Not so much subject to earthquakes as in Japan. It's it has very, very temperate climate. Taipei is overcrowded like most Asian cities. Asian cities, after a while, Bill, and I only realized this in my most recent trip, they take upon a certain thumbness look-alike from one another. It's almost like they've been stamped in the same molds.
Yeah.
Which is only to say that they're new.
Yeah.
Only to say that they're new.
But and it's interesting that you would say that, because that's really what China is insisting when it claims that Taiwan remains part of China. That there's one mold, and this is part of it.
But
I just wonder how this is gonna work out. It almost seems like an impasse that's impossible to get beyond. I just don't see. I just don't see a way to work this out. At least not quickly. I think maybe over generations it might change, but.
Bill, you have just said to me what I have, in fact, on numerous occasions, both in the United States and in Taiwan, to people. A, you have to work this out for yourselves, and B, I have no answer.
Yeah.
Right now, this problem appears to be unsolvable. Taiwan, as I said, they want to see the status quo continue. Maybe with closer economic connections with the mainland, which have been going on. But on the question of how is China defined, with or without Taiwan, Taiwanese have said, leave us out. Mm-hmm. Bill, no, I'm blabbering on about something that you are absolutely correct on.
Yeah.
It's their problem. It's their problem.
Well, and that's...
The question is, how long is
the whole situation very sensitive for the United States, doesn't it?
Sure.
We've got to be careful because it's eggshells over there. It seems like
that's right.
Whatever we do over there, we're walking on eggshells.
Yeah. The question is, Taiwan, let's keep the status quo. Beijing, the status quo is not, in that it means you're not joining with us, is not satisfactory. Mm-hmm. Then the question becomes how, if Beijing believes the present status quo is unsatisfactory, when and how and what means will they use to change it?
Right.
They've said, the Chinese, the Beijing, the leaders in Beijing have made no secret of the fact that they think that the unification of Taiwan with China is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. But you and I, as historians, we know that nothing's inevitable.
No, nothing's inevitable. But wow.
And thus, to quote Shakespeare, there is the rub, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
There's the rub.
It just seems like
I can't give them an answer. And believe me, I thought about it.
With the situation being as sensitive and as tense as it is, we need to be a lot more careful than we've been, because we could really muck this up pretty bad.
Well, sure.
Sure. And I mean, it worries me. I'm going back to something you said quite a while ago. It worries me that they don't know as much as you know. I just get the feeling that they are walking into a situation that they really don't appreciate, and that's I guess that's what bothers me.
I'd like to ask you a question that has been posed to me by numerous people. Do you think the United States public would ever support the United States going to war with China to support Taiwan if China invaded Taiwan? Do you think that our loyalty to Taiwan is worth one American soldier, or Air Force, or Navy?
Yeah.
That's
the answer to your question is I don't think the American people would support it.
I would think you're right.
I really don't. And on the other hand, that presumes that people know a little bit about the sensitivity of the situation. What bothers me right now is that I'm convinced that there are some people involved in this right now that don't really understand how sensitive it is, and I think that's what scares me.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean,
the fact that he has neutered the State Department and all of those people that have spent their lives.
That's right.
Accumulating knowledge and of the way the world works, and now they're going into other careers. They're retiring early. Because the State Department is being demeaned. And what are we losing? My God, look at the expertise that we're losing.
All right, Bill. You're singing to the choir.
Oh my God. Well, that's one reason I wanted you to come on, because I'm very interested in the Taiwan situation, but more than that, it's so interconnected with all the other things that are going on over there.
Sure it is.
And we're in the middle of all of it. I mean, we have this huge presence in South Korea. We have this huge presence in Japan.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're in a position where we could set the whole thing off if we're not careful.
Well, I think my sense of it, and I can't speak for the Trump administration, but we are trying to keep Taiwan on a short leash. That's the best way to put it. We don't want them to ever declare independence. If in doing that it means that then triggers automatically an attack by China on Taiwan.
It does.
And then, boy, then the rocket has gone up. The genie's out of the bottle.
That's right.
That's why I said in my remarks to start. That's why the Taiwan-China issue is one of the major flashpoints in the world, indeed in a possible war between the United States and China.
Right.
And I don't think most Americans even are aware of that. You and I are.
Well, I'm also thinking about it from the perspective of the Chinese.
Yes. Okay.
Because they know it too. I mean, they obviously don't want to be drawn into a war. I mean, to me, it would seem to me the last thing they want is to have to follow through with what they've threatened.
Well,
they ought to be satisfied with the status quo as well.
Yeah.
Because it could go either way.
Let me just throw in this little, I'll call a little military information about China. And that's why China is building up a navy. they have a policy of what they call the denial policy. The only way the People's Republic of China could get troops from China across 100 miles of water to Taiwan, which is a big operation, by the way, is they have to keep the United States Navy out of the Taiwan Straits long enough for them to do that.
Right.
And they call that, the Chinese call that the denial strategy. Deny the American Navy access to the Taiwan Straits while we're undergoing our military operation. And we can go on rhapsodically about our carrier task force and all the destroyers that accompany them, and we have 13 of those task force or carrier task forces around the world. They are nothing but sitting ducks to Chinese or any nation's missiles.
Mm-hmm.
They're only used to make a statement. Now, you could make the point, which some of you to make, that if the Chinese planning to attack Taiwan and keep American Navy out of the Taiwan Straits suddenly hit a couple aircraft carriers with missiles, then the ball is up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is America going to accept that? Is the American public going to accept 4,000 sailors on the USS Forrestal killed?
See, I think that the American people would support action in that sense, but I don't think that the American people would support retaliatory action against China moving into Taiwan. I don't know. I don't know that. I just don't think that there's any sense of appreciation for the fact that this is a flashpoint. I really don't.
No, there isn't. There isn't. You know, when I raised this point, and I've wrote articles on it with some of my fellow historians, political science, or even members of my family who are quite intelligent, lawyers, good degrees, I get a big ho-hum. Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
From them. They're completely built. They don't have any knowledge. They're not interested in being educated. They don't care.
Yeah.
Give me my New York Football Giants no, this is a hyperbole. Give me my New York Football Giants game on a Sunday afternoon. Bring in my beer and pretzels. Get a little hug from my girlfriend, and boy, the world is great.
Yeah. Yeah, I got you. I hear you.
Sometimes, Bill, this is where knowledge can be as much of a curse as it can be a benefit.
I know. We're kind of moving out, getting close to the end here, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about when you said you lectured in Taiwan and in Beijing, in China.
Yeah. In Tokyo.
Tokyo. What? Maybe I'm off base here, but what is the difference? I mean, how does your presentation differ? I'm assuming it was pretty much on the same themes. Maybe I'm wrong.
No. In Taiwan, I talked essentially. I have the lecture right in front of me on the Taiwan question.
Right.
In Japan, I got on the subject of the American-Japanese alliance.
Uh-huh.
And also on the issue of the desire on the part of Shinzo Abe to get rid of Article Number 9 in the Japanese Constitution, which forbid Japan ever to go to war.
Mm-hmm.
Japan would like that removed. Well, Abe would like that removed. Which, incidentally, that will set off a titanic debate in Japan. Over that question.
I'm kind of surprised.
Should Japan not only have its own military, but the right to use that military in an offensive manner? which we forced them not to do for half after World War II.
I'm surprised.
And to change
Japan,
to change that Constitution.
I'm just surprised that Japan has put up with that for as long as they have.
You're right.
I never really thought they would.
Well, in point of fact, they haven't. Japan has the third largest navy in the world.
Japan.
A lot of things that America don't know about Japan. They very, very subtly got right around it. They called it a self-defense force.
Because Japan has
now
always
they
had
want
military
to have, they want to have all the powers of a legitimate nation state, including their own army, navy, and air force, to use even offensively if they think that it's required.
Right.
Not just to defend themselves. And this is the debate that's taking shape in Japan. And it relates to Shinzo Abe's desire to remove that Article 9. And I'll tell you, it is going to set off a real storm in Japan.
I have never... I mean, I knew that the redevelopment of Japan after the war was contingent on them not building up a military.
That's right.
But I've often wondered, I mean, here we are, we're 70 years beyond that, and 75 years, and I'm thinking it's amazing to me that they've allowed this to go on this long. Because this puts in the world of nations, it's like they got one arm tied behind their back. They can't really be considered equal to other nations when, in fact, they have this albatross hanging around their neck, which is they can't militarize.
That's right. But in point of fact, one of the nations in the world that the United States Navy most interacts with and has mutual tactical exercise is Japan.
Yeah.
And we have, in fact, the husband of my first wife, now deceased, her husband was a captain in the United States Navy. And he would spend about 3 months out of every year stationed in Japan with his missile cruiser.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to, one of the things he used to do when he was there with his missile cruiser, which he was captain of, was have operations with other Japanese cruisers and ships.
Mm-hmm.
That's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
Long time.
Yeah.
See, between now, again, most Americans don't know about that. Anyway.
Kevin, do you think Asia is this area is underappreciated, understudied? I mean, you're into it, and you're into it in a big way. But I just get the feeling that I don't know whether it's a prejudice against that part of the world or what, but it just seems like people in this country don't really know a whole lot about what's going on over there. I don't know nearly as much as I should. I know, but
well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to answer your question. Do I think it's underappreciated? Yes. Do I think there's a whole chasm of ignorance? Yes. How did I get interested in Asia? Through the back door of Vietnam and teaching American Vietnam for 20 years.
Right.
I'll be honest with you, it's only recently that I've developed an increasingly intense interest in China.
Yeah.
And then my association with the Asian Society Policy Institute, where I had the good fortune to hear. I mean, and I don't want to come and go blow my own horn. This had nothing to do. When you work for the former 25th Prime Minister of Australia, you get to hear very, very high-powered people.
Yeah.
I'm not, no exaggeration. In fact, I just have an invitation to be at the Society on March 19th to hear the Foreign Minister of Afghanistan. And then they have another program coming up later in the week. No, and I'm also a member of the Japan and Korea Society, also, Bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah.
I really believe. I just believe that what you're doing is so important because not enough people are doing it. Not enough people know the things that you're finding out. And I really think it's important that you continue to do this.
Oh, I will continue, and boy, you don't know how much your encouragement means. Bill, this is just a personal note. When I retired from the history department at the University of Albany, I offered to come back and teach classes almost on a volunteer. They completely rejected me.
Yeah.
In other words, I did not leave the history department at Albany with a lot of
right
warm feelings against some people.
Well, I had a similar situation yesterday. I think I mentioned to you that I was going to Richmond yesterday to have lunch with many of the people that I used to teach with.
Yes, I did that. Yeah, I did know that. Yes.
And my wife went with me, and we were driving back. And of course, we had a 4-hour drive each way, so we spent a lot of time in the car. We spent a lot of time in the car, but on the way back, we were chatting, and she made the point, and she's right on, that I've been gone from J. Sergeant Reynolds since 1991.
That's right.
And she said, you've been gone from there 30 years, almost 30 years, and you still have warmer relationships there than you do up the road here when you Concord, where you retired from. And I said, that place in Richmond is nothing. Concord's nothing like that. It was all cliques and who knew and who didn't talk to whom and all of these other things.
That's right.
And as I remember the community college situation, there was none of that. And we have this group yesterday. There were 24 of us at lunch. People from the math department, the engineering department, the English department, administration, the former provost was there. And I'm thinking everybody is interacting with everybody else like nobody's better or worse than anybody else. Right. It's a very unique situation. I didn't appreciate it as much when I was there as I do now.
Well, speaking about J. Sergeant Reynolds, and I was, as you know, never full-time there,
right?
But I had tremendous relationships with you, with Winston Smith. I'm trying to think of other people that I the guy that interviewed me. I had wonderful. I even went out to with a guy. I forget his name. Who I went out to teach at the Western Prison out there.
Oh yeah. I did.
Yeah,
I used to teach a lot of classes.
John something or other was an older guy. I had a wonderful. In fact, I've still kept a very close relationship with both you and Winston Smith. In fact, I'll call him after I. But it was, and I don't want to give you a misimpression, because I got along with most people in the history department. But there were certain people there that had their knives out for me for God knows what reason. I don't know.
I know. I had the same situation, but
Kevin,
I swear to God, we're just about out of time, and I can't believe it.
Yes. Okay.
We're right at the we're right at the top of the hour. 2 hours, Kevin. No break or nothing.
That's right.
I didn't know my kidneys would go that long. Hey, listen, Kevin.
Well, I had a little bottle, Bill, right down on the floor in case they came out.
Hey, listen, Kevin. Thank you so much for your time and the information you shared with us. It's wonderful.
And I'll leave you with this thought. When we get 70 degrees temperature, no ice, no snow on the road, which is ice as snow is going. I'm heading down to your way to see both you and stop by to see Winston.
Okay.
Which I did
great.
once before. Remember
Right.
I came down and talked in the Civil War when you were,
Yeah. Kevin,
Okay.
thank you so much. I've been looking forward to it, and I wasn't disappointed.
Okay.
Thank you very,
Thanks,
very
Denny.
much.
No problem.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
buddy. You've been listening to the Virtual Center for Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We've gone a minute or so over today, but under the circumstances, I think it was well worth it. What a a minefield full of information. It's just unbelievable. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We won't be broadcasting again until next Monday. I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of this Wednesday and a wonderful rest of the week and weekend. So, again, for Bob Kincaid, Agnes, and the folks at Head On, this is Bill Obrien. Thank you so very, very much.